My job is to talk, and yours is to listen. Now, if you get through before I do, raise your hand, okay? All right. I appreciate so many of you turning out tonight for this evening about reflecting on the more than 40 years that Richard Nixon, the 37th President of the United States, came on and off Key Biscayne. Nixon probably dominated the second half of the 20th century with good news and with bad news. He was on the cover of Time for over 50 times. I've been trying to figure out how many times the dateline of a national or international story was Key Biscayne, Florida. He came here in 1950, tiny little island in 1950. Only, 100 houses, or they were still being constructed. He came here as a senator from California. He then came here as the Vice President of the United States. Then he became a presidential candidate. Then he lost the election to JFK. He then came back as a defeated candidate for governor of California. And then in 1968, he was elected President of the United States. And in 1972, he was re-elected in a landslide election with the greatest electoral majority of anybody, including FDR. He had over 500 electoral votes. He also had the highest popular majority. And yet, in 1974, he resigned. He resigned as President of the United States. I think a good place to begin, and one of the things that I have enjoyed in my retirement is I have been chaplain on many cruise ships, including the QE2. And I was introduced on the QE2 to a lady, Rosemary Smathers. And I said, oh, that's a famous name in Florida. Are you related in any way to Senator George Smathers? And she said, distantly. I'm the mother of his children. But I got the best years of his life. I got the presidential years. I got both presidents. The story begins in Coral Gables when Libby and George Smathers were students together. And then when Smathers became a U.S. Senator, Libby invited Smathers to bring some of his friends, and he took them fishing on the Cocolobo. There were two Cocolobos, a small one and then a bigger one. And among the senators who went fishing on Key Biscayne were three future presidents of the United States. Richard Nixon, Kennedy, and LBJ. And a lot of wannabes. A lot of wannabes. Now, interesting, much of this story has to do with Nixon and Bibi Ramosa. 1972, cover of Light magazine, there is Bibi, big smile on his face. and Nixon playing golf. But the fact of the matter was that the first time Nixon came on board, he was not impressed. Libby was not impressed. In fact, he wrote to Smathers, "Don't bring that dull guy back again." He doesn't drink whiskey, he doesn't chase women, and he doesn't even play golf. Now, I got that little tidbit from a book, a very fine book, published 2 years ago, called Richard Nixon Life by John Farrell. And John Farrell was a reporter for the Boston Globe and the Denver Post. It has now been 23 years since Nixon went to the White House, and I think we're beginning to get some fairly level-headed, unpolitical evaluation of his time and his stewardship. When he first came here, he rented a house on Warren Lane, 630 Warren Lane, and then Villa 69 at the Key Biscayne Hotel. Dahlberg taught Nixon how to play golf. He also trained Trish and Julie in the golf game. Ace, who is now in an assisted living facility, when he had his 80th birthday, played golf with Arnold Palmer. And also played golf with Vice President Joe Biden. He also played golf with Richard Nixon. And after the golf game with Nixon, Nixon was running for president in 1960. Nixon said, "Well, you beat me at golf, how about voting for me?" He said, "No, I'm a Democrat. I'll play golf, I'll teach you to play golf, but I'm not going to vote for you." The interesting thing about the Key Biscayne Hotel, you had to wear a tie at the bar. Those were the old days. And many people remember the vice presidential years at the Key Biscayne Hotel. Alma Troppolini, Dr. Hamburger, often had dinner at a table next to the Nixons. There's a piano. It's still on Key Biscayne. The piano at the bar was played by JFK, Richard Nixon, and Irving Berlin. And now launched to Joanne Young. Now, interesting, when they played the piano, and Nixon loved Gladys Vandenberg. Remember Gladys?
Yes.
She had an accordion, and she sang along with Nixon. Excuse me. And Nixon invited her to come and play for Pat's birthday when he was president of the United States and they had moved into the Winter White House. Villa 69 had many, many visitors. Ann Owen tells me that she and Clyde were at the beach club, and Villa 69 was right next to the beach club, and he noticed that Billy Graham was there. Nobody ever saw Nixon swim, but Billy Graham liked to swim. And so Clyde Owen put on his bathing suit and went and had a great talk and visited with Billy Graham in the water in Key Biscayne. Reverend Susan's mother was a fan of Nixon. And when Nixon lost the election in '60, she wrote him a letter. And she also baked him some cookies, some brownies. and sent him some brownies. Nixon sent her a thank you letter, which is in the church office, and he thanked her. He said, when he won the election, he's gotten all kinds of congratulations and letters and thank yous and flowers. But when he lost, he hardly heard from anybody, and he never got any brownies. Well, okay. These pictures may or may not pertain to anything I have to say. But talking to the Burns, Dick Burns was a good friend, the president, and the vice president. His wife, Jane, was the telephone operator at the hotel. And she reported that she had all kinds, especially during the presidential year, all kinds of important phone calls, except for J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover had his own private line going down to his room. Heard from all kinds of people. With the bellhop at the hotel, whose name I don't remember, but tells me that Nixon had an incredible memory for names. And he gave an example that the first time Nixon checked in as vice president to the hotel, he remembered the guy's name. 3 or 4 months later, Nixon came in and the guy went out to get his bag, and Nixon remembered his name. This was something probably that led to his political success. Patrick Cannon, look, Patrick Cannon was one of Nixon's speechwriters. And Patrick Cannon said that when Nixon became president, that the Key Biscayne Hotel was awash important people. Cannon liked to swim laps in the pool. Excuse me. And he said one day, he swam down to the end, and there was Henry Kissinger in a bathing suit in a lounge chair, covered with confidential Secret Service papers. The churches had quite an experience of Richard Nixon and his family. During the vice presidential years, according to Merle Hamm, he attended the community church on a fairly frequent basis. Bought the first electronic organ for the community church. And also, when Pat Nixon died, he planted a yellow rose bush in the garden there at the church. Now, he never attended the Episcopal Church, far too young. The Episcopal Church was founded in 1960, and being at the Calusa, what became the Calusa Playhouse, which had been the bunkhouse for the itinerant workers who came in from the Bahamas to start harvest the cooking. Father Mahal said one day, and he was the first priest at the church, and he was walking down the beach, and there comes Nixon with his pants rolled up and his coat over his head. And Mahal went up to him and introduced himself. Of course, at that time, Nixon was running for president. And Nixon said, I appreciate the fact that you keep the door of the church open. because when I come back from campaigning, I am usually all strung out. And I go and sit in the church for an hour or two and calm down. And then go home and go to sleep. Which is an interesting dimension of a man's life. He loved to walk the beach. And then, of course, the real big church was the Key Biscayne Presbyterian Church. And when Nixon was president, he attended in great numbers with his entire cabinet, including Henry Kissinger. He loved to sing. He loved to sing. And interesting, the front row of the church was Dorothy Lemonnick. Dorothy Lemonnick realized that she was no further from the President of the United States than I am from my wife on the first row. And so while they were singing, and only Dorothy Lemonnick would do this, she winked at him. And the President winked back. And then Dick Cromartie, who was not a fan of Nixon, remembers Nixon coming up to him in the Presbyterian church, and somebody had told him about Dick's war record and the fact he was a war hero, and Nixon thanked him for all his good service. Now, over at the Presbyterian church, there's a victory bench. And probably the most exciting, wonderful week of Nixon's life occurred in January of 1973. He was re-inaugurated President of the United States. Henry Kissinger had gone to Paris and signed what he thought was a peace treaty that ended the Vietnam War. That didn't happen. But at any rate, Nixon flew down to Key Biscayne. And there was a great celebration at the Key Biscayne Presbyterian Church. And Nixon went out and rang the bell to celebrate. Special places on the Key. All the bars were loaded. A particular interest is Jamaica Inn. In 1960, Beaver Revello told me that after Nixon had conceded the election to John F. Kennedy, he came down to Key Biscayne. They went to dinner at the Jamaica Inn. During the course of the meal, they received several telephone calls. One was from Eisenhower, one was from J. Edgar Hoover, one was from the Attorney General Brownell, and one was from JFK. Now the first three were urging Nixon to contest the election. There had been some hanky-panky in Illinois and in Texas. Nixon said it would take a year for that to happen. Whoever was in the White House would be powerless. And because they were at the top of the Cold War, according to Libby, Nixon said, I don't want to put the country at danger. JFK said, you know, they've given me a helicopter. I want to come down and see you. Nixon said, oh, I was going to come up to Palm Beach and see you. No, he said, I want to come down and see our old friend Libby. Now, interestingly, the helicopter went to the marina down at the end of the island, and then a convertible picked him up. There was no great parade, but Joan Gill Blank heard that he was coming on the Cape. And Joan went out there and waved at him. Joan, stand up. Where are you, Joan? Yay! And JFK waved back. Absolutely. One of the great days of Joan. They met, as you know, for the Sunside Summit, again at Villa 69. Interesting. As Vice President of the United States, Richard Nixon was the President of the Senate. And in January, he announced to the Senate of the United States the election of John F. Kennedy. A very poignant moment. Repeated 8 years later, when Vice President Hubert Humphrey stood before the Senate and announced the election of Richard. Also at the Jamaica Inn, when Nixon became president, he interviewed for the first time Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger was Rockefeller's friend. And Rockefeller, who was no great friend of Nixon, however, convinced him this man knows something about foreign policy. And so Kissinger came down to the Jamaica Inn, and they met, and the rest is history. Another spot on the key is the presidential compound. The end of bailing on Biscayne Bay. It's a little marker of the history trail, because this was what that was. It's interesting because the security was really very tight. They put a torpedo net out in the bay. They blocked off a whole area of the bay. Iraqs consider this a great challenge. But the fact of the matter is that they were afraid that somebody would come along with a rowboat and drop a torpedo and would go in and blow up. Also, Nixon liked to walk the beach. But as President of the United States, with all the security, they didn't think that the beach on the ocean was a good place. And so they built a beach. They built the Nixon Beach, which is no longer there. And he and his family often walked on. It's interesting, Bill and Sandy Earle, their house is right at the end of what was the presidential compound and was in the security area. And the Secret Service told them, you gotta be careful. If you go skinny dipping or hanky-panky in the pool, the minute the water splashes the lights and the sirens, they're going to come up. So you're going to have to behave yourself. Many famous guests came to the Winter Band. Among them was Willy Brandt, Chancellor of Germany, came down in 1971. And Nixon asked Tommy Sykes, remember Tommy Sykes? And he asked him if the chowder choppers, remember the chowder choppers?
Chowder.
If they would drift by the presidential compound and play Old Tannenbaum with the German printer. The other visitors, many of them, Nixon came back from his post-China trip in 1972. Don't know how much of the China trip was actually plotted and planned on Key Biscayne. But when he finished, he came down, and according to Pat Buchanan was very disappointed in the China trip. He felt that Nixon had thrown Taiwan under the bus. And Nixon said, we'll come down to Key Biscayne and we'll talk about it. And he convinced them that Taiwan would remain independent, although they had to give up their embassy in Washington, D.C. Interesting, in Pat's book, which was published last year, is a picture of the dinner party. And at that dinner party, sitting next to the President of the United States, is a beautiful young lady named Jane Lucky. Later, Jane Rebosi. Also among the visitors, unfortunately, was G. Gordon Liddy. Not Libby, Liddy. And we know about work. We know about work. One of the few remaining physical evidence of Nixon's visit here is the helicopter pad. Jim O'Neill's daughter, Ann, remembers when that first helicopter came in and she went down there and shook the president's hand. That was a great time. O'Neill also remembers at one time being asked by Libby to take his Colombo boat and take Pat and the girls around the island, which he did with great success. And there are many people who remember going up and down the canals and waving. Now I'm wearing a wild tropical shirt, and Gene Ferris, who is no longer living here, Gene was the first chief stewardess of the American Airlines. And Gene was not a fan of Nixon, but she always knew when Nixon was coming on board, because the Secret Service all of a sudden appeared with these wild shirts. Also, she knew the president was going to come. And it's very, very interesting. One of the memories that I think everybody has, who was here at the time, was the wild church and the Secret Service everywhere. I talked to Mike Rubin, the son of the owner of Burns Bench. And he remembers Nixon coming into his father's store, accompanied by 2 or 3 Secret Service people. And also the story is told that Nixon made a Burns Bench shop tailored many shirts for the President of the United States. And one day, Mike's father received a phone call where he called the president and said, I got to take a couple more measurements on this shirt. And Nixon said, well, come on over for supper. So he went over, got his best suit on to go over, of course. And when he went over to the president, he put his hand in his pocket to pull out his measuring tape and 2 Secret Service folks. Now, Vernon's drugstore was also a favorite place for the Nixon. And I was talking to Bob this morning. By the way, he says his father is fine. His father is home. He's fully recovered. He was at the yacht club last weekend for dinner, I think for Friday night. But anyway, Nixon and Libby used to come by the drugstore at 7 o'clock. The drugstore did not open for breakfast until 8. But Vernon opened the drugstore early and served breakfast to Nixon and Libby. Bob Bristol said he never had Nixon in the store. However, he has hundreds of pictures that people took. In fact, I talked to Bob today, and Bob has taken over 2,000 pictures of history of Key Biscayne and put them on a digital disc. And he will give these to the Historical Society, and it'd be a good evening, maybe to have Bob out here and show all the pictures, not just of Nixon, but of everybody else on the beach in the good old days. That's possible. Now, Pedro the barber never cut Nixon's hair. He did cut Vice President Spiro Agnew, who is, okay? But he does remember, and this is the Secret Service again. One day, all of a sudden, they were roping off the parking lot there by the 7-Eleven. The presidential limousine came in. And Nixon got out, went into the flower shop, and bought some roses. Now, one of the amazing things that happened that changed world history on Key Biscayne was the Yom Kippur War. In October of 1972, Egypt and Syria, on the High Holy Day, ganged up and destroyed the Israeli Air Force. According to Libby, he and Nixon were out at Cap Cay. They got the word. They came in. Nixon took charge, re-equipped the Israeli Air Force with American planes, which they had anyway. And according to my American Legion friends, that some of them didn't change the logo on the plane. Some of them still were flying on the American flag. They turned the war around, drove the Egyptians across the Suez Canal, could have taken cargo, drove the Syrians up to the gates of Damascus. Now, interesting, my son, my oldest son, for some reason, had been reading the Jerusalem Post on the internet. And back in August, two aged Israeli generals were interviewed about the Yom Kippur War. And they were asked, was there any chance of an atomic war, a nuclear war? They said, oh yes, yeah. We had the bomb. And he said, we were under orders. We had an airfield. We had the bombs in a bunker. We were going to take the bombs out into the Sinai on top of a hill in an uninhabited area, just to show the world and the Egyptians and the Syrians that we had the bomb. We were going to blow it up. And when Nixon took over, re-equipped the Air Force, they didn't do that. So we could have had a nuclear explosion. Anyway, now, my friend Rabbi Caroline said there's an interesting little twist to that story. He said a very good friend of mine went out to the Nixon Library in California, and the Nixon tapes were released about 5 years ago. And he went and got the actual conversation between Nixon and Kissinger. And unfortunately, Nixon had a couple of martinis. And he said, tell the epic Jews we're going to help them out. And that avoided a nuclear. Okay? We're coming to the end. Coming to the point where Libby received a phone call during the height of, by the way, Nixon's role in saving Israel was right at the height of Watergate. And the papers were full of Watergate. And the Yom Kippur War got about this 6 inches on page 25. So he hardly got any credit at that time. But anyway, not too long later, Libby got a phone call from Nixon. Please come to Washington. So he flew up National Airport, now Reagan National Airport, got in the limousine, went out to the White House, was about to get out of the limousine, and Nixon got in and directed the driver to take them down to the Potomac, to the presidential yacht, the Sequoia. And Nixon directed the captain of the Sequoia to take them way down the Potomac, way out of range of any of those microphones that could pick up something 100 yards away. And then he went out on the front deck. And he took, I'm going to ask you to stand up. He took 2 chairs. Put them like this, over the engine running. So they talked it, put the chairs that way, so they talked to each other's ear. And Nixon, I'm going to sit down. Nixon unloaded on where things were, and it turned out that there was no question that he would be impeached because the Democrats held both the House of Representatives and the Senate. And there was a question, of course, you know, Nixon never was impeached. He would have. But then when you impeach, you go to the Senate, and the Senate by, I think, a 2/3 majority has to kick you out. And he did not think he had enough support. He had lost control and the support of the Republican Party. And Barry Goldwater was quoted as saying, Mr. President, the only time you call us up here is when you got your butt in a crack. And Bibi said you got one choice. You can resign and leave in honor, or you can be impeached and kicked out. Now it's up to you. They went back to the White House. Bibi spent the night, flew back to Key Biscayne, and 3 days later, Richard Nixon, on August the 9th, 1974, resigned the presidency of the United States. Now, in that speech, which you can get on the internet, he said something because my particular literary work has been done in the area of forgiveness. And he said a very profound thing. And he said something about don't hate the people that hate you. Because if you do, the hate will chew you up. And so he left and flew it. Now, back on Key Biscayne Yacht Club, Al Tuggle, I don't know if you remember Al Tuggle, but he was a great friend of mine. Worked for the phone company. Al was the communist. And after Nixon's resignation, everybody was taking away, kicking him out. He lost legal credentials, could no longer practice. And somebody said, let's take away his honorary membership of the yacht club. Al Tuggle said, well, I'll tell you, I never voted for the SOB. I never liked the SOB. But I don't believe in kicking a man when he's down. Besides, he never comes to the yacht club by himself. He always comes with Bibi. Now, you're not going to kick Bibi out, are you? No. What's the next order? And so that was the after. After the resignation, Nixon lived for another 20 years. And he became a snowbird. He kept coming to Key Biscayne, back to Villa 69, no secret service. The ex-presidents of the United States are allowed secret service. He said, I don't want them. I don't want them. And so he wandered about. He wandered about. We don't have a lot of information because Tom O'Brien, who owned the newspaper, was not a Nixon fan. And according to Ann Owens, he didn't want any pictures taken of Richard Nixon. And if they did do a story, they always had to say the resigned former president of the United States. So we don't have a lot of information. We do know, however, we found that Sylvia Nera Reed was a babysitter for the Eisenhower show. And also, much to my surprise, Nixon developed a friendship with Bill Clinton. And Libby had told me about this. And then there's a very fine book called The President's Club. It talks about the relationship of the sitting president to his predecessor. And they developed a friendship. Nixon wrote letters to all his successors and said, good luck, and if I can be of any help, call me. Here's my number.